Geoffrey Hinton, the guy who basically gave AI its brain. Known as the Godfather of AI, he's got some wild thoughts about machines, not just taking our jobs, but possibly taking over entirely. Yeah, you heard that right. If you're curious about whether your smart fridge might one day outsmart you, stick around. Hinton's been there, done that, and now he's here to spill the tea on our AI-filled future.
Almost everybody I know who's an expert on AI believes that they will exceed human intelligence. It's just a question of when. In between 5 and 20 years from now, there's a probability of about a half that we'll have to confront the problem of them trying to take over. I'm still as concerned as I have been, but I'm very pleased that the world's beginning to take it seriously. So in particular, they're beginning to take the existential threat seriously, that these things will get smarter than us, and we have to worry about whether they'll want to take control away from us. That's something we should think seriously about, and people now take that seriously. A few years ago, they thought it was just science fiction.
The guy who basically invented the stuff that's making your phone smarter than you is telling us that super smart machines aren't science fiction anymore. They're real, they're coming, and they're about to outsmart us all. And people used to laugh at this? Classic. Now, everyone's like, wait, maybe we should pay attention before Alexa decides she's too good for us. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, where we're the ones who built the train and laid the tracks.
And from your perspective, from having worked at the top, having developed some of the theories underpinning all of this explosion in AI that we're seeing, that existential threat is real.
Yes. So some people think these things don't really understand. They're very different from us. They're just using some statistical tricks. That's not the case. These big language models, for example, the early ones were developed as a theory of how the brain understands language. They're the best theory we've currently got of how the brain understands language. We don't understand either how they work or how the brain works in detail, but we think probably they work in fairly similar ways.
These AI models aren't just fancy calculators. They're mimicking how our brains understand language. Awesome. So not only are they getting smarter, but they're thinking like us too. What's next? AI that gets existential dread? Maybe they'll start a podcast about how misunderstood they are. But seriously, if we don't fully grasp how they or our own brains work, who's really in control here?
What is it that's triggered your concern?
It's been a combination of two things. So playing with the large chatbots, particularly one at Google before GPT-4, but also with GPT-4, they're clearly very competent. They clearly understand a lot. They have a lot more knowledge than any person. They're like a not very good expert at more or less everything. So that was one worry. And a second was coming to understand the way in which they're a superior form of intelligence, because you can make many copies of the same neural network. Each copy can look at a different bit of data, and then they can all share what they learned. So imagine if we had 10,000 people, they could all go off and do a degree in something, they could share what they learned efficiently, and then we'd have 10,000 degrees. We'd know a lot then. We can't share knowledge nearly as efficiently as different copies of the same neural network can.
Okay, so the key concern here is that it could exceed human intelligence, indeed the massive human intelligence.
Very few of the experts are in doubt about that. Almost everybody I know who's an expert on AI believes that they will exceed human intelligence. It's just a question of when.
Did you catch that? Hinton basically said AI can clone itself, learn 10,000 different things at once, and then merge all that knowledge like it's no big deal. Meanwhile, I can't even remember where I left my keys this morning. So we're up against an intelligence that can outlearn us overnight. It's like we're bringing a calculator to a quantum physics exam. And the kicker? All the experts agree it's not if, but when AI surpasses us. Comforting, right?
And at that point, it's really quite difficult to control them.
Well, we don't know. We've never dealt with something like this before. There's a few experts, like my friend Jan LeCun, who think it'll be no problem. We'll give them the goals. It'll be no problem. They'll do what we say. They'll be subservient to us. There's other experts who think absolutely they'll take control. Given this big spectrum of opinions, I think it's wise to be cautious. I think there's a chance they'll take control, and it's a significant chance. It's not like 1%, it's much more.
Could they not be contained in certain areas, I don't know, scientific research, but not, for example, the armed forces?
Maybe, but actually if you look at all the current legislation, including the European legislation, there's a little clause in all of it that says that none of this applies to military applications. Governments aren't willing to restrict their own uses of it for defense.
So some people are like, relax, we'll just program AI to be our obedient little helpers. Sure, because that always works out in sci-fi movies, right? Meanwhile, Hinton's over here saying there's more than a slim chance they'll take over. Oh, and fun fact, all that fancy legislation to regulate AI doesn't apply to the military, because who needs safety when you can have killer robots? Governments are basically saying, do as we say, not as we do, while gearing up for an AI arms race. What could possibly go wrong?
I mean, there's been some evidence, even in current conversations, conflicts of the use of AI in generating thousands and thousands of targets.
Yes.
I mean, that's happened since you started warning about AI. Is that the sort of pathway that you're concerned about?
I mean, that's the thin end of the wedge. What I'm most concerned about is when these things can autonomously make the decision to kill people. So robot soldiers.
Yeah.
And those are coming.
Drones and the like.
And it may be we can get something like Geneva Conventions to regulate them, but I don't think that's going to happen until after very nasty things have happened.
Yes, autonomous weapons deciding who lives and who doesn't, because nothing says progress like outsourcing morality to machines. Hinton's worried about robot soldiers and killer drones making their own calls. Maybe we'll get around to updating the Geneva Conventions after we've had a Terminator-style oopsie. It's like we're playing with matches in a room full of dynamite. But hey, at least we're innovative.
And there's an analogy here with the Manhattan Project and with Oppenheimer, which is if we restrain ourselves from military use in the G7 advanced democracies, what's going on in China, what's going on in Russia?
Yes, it has to be an international agreement. But if you look at chemical weapons, the international agreement for chemical weapons has worked quite well.
I mean, do you have any sense of whether the shackles are off in a place like Russia?
Well, Putin said some years ago that whoever controls AI controls the world. So I imagine they're working very hard.
So even if we play nice and keep our AI soldiers on a leash, Hinton reminds us that other countries might not be so considerate. Putin basically said, first one to control AI wins the world. No pressure. International agreements would be great. But considering how well everyone cooperates globally, I'm not holding my breath. It's like we're all in a race to build the smartest, potentially most dangerous kid on the block.
Fortunately, the West is probably well ahead of them in research. We're probably still slightly ahead of China, but China's putting more resources in. And so in terms of military uses of AI, I think there's going to be a race.
Sounds very theoretical, but this argument, this thread of argument, if you follow it, you really are quite worried about extinction level events.
So we should distinguish these different risks. The risk of using AI for autonomous lethal weapons doesn't depend on AI being smarter than us. That's a quite separate risk from the risk that the AI itself will go rogue and try and take over. I'm worried about both things. The autonomous weapons is clearly going to come.
Yeah.
Whether AI goes rogue and tries to take over is something we may be able to control or we may not. We don't know. And so at this point, before it's more intelligent than us, we should be putting huge resources into seeing whether we are going to be able to control it.
Hinton's not just freaking out about killer robots. He's also losing sleep over AI deciding humans are obsolete. Two separate nightmares for the price of one. And while we're busy debating budgets, AI is sprinting ahead. He suggests we throw massive resources at figuring out how to keep a leash on our digital Frankenstein before it gets smarter than us. Considering we can't even agree on climate change, I'm not overly optimistic we'll get our act together in time.
What sort of society do you see evolving? Which jobs will still be here?
Yeah, so I'm very worried about AI taking over lots of mundane jobs, and that should be a good thing. It's going to lead to a big increase in productivity, which leads to a big increase in wealth. And if that wealth was equally distributed, that would be great, but it's not going to be. In the systems we live in, that wealth is going to go to the rich and not to the people whose jobs get lost. And that's going to be very bad for society, I believe. So it's going to increase the gap between rich and poor, which increases the chances of right-wing populists getting elected.
Here's the plot twist. AI could make us richer than ever, but only if you're already rich. Hinton points out that while robots do all the work, the money won't trickle down. Surprise. Instead, we'll see the wealth gap stretch wider than the Grand Canyon, and that's a breeding ground for political chaos. So not only do we have to worry about Skynet, but also about society tearing itself apart, because Jeff Bezos bought all the AI, and we're left twiddling our thumbs.
So to be clear, you think that the societal impacts from the changes in jobs could be so profound that we may need to rethink the politics of, the benefit system, inequality,
Absolutely, yes.
Universal basic income?
Yes, I certainly believe in universal basic income. I don't think that's enough, though, because a lot of people get their self-respect from the job they do. And if you put everybody on universal basic income, that solves the problem of them starving and not being able to pay the rent, but it doesn't solve the self-respect problem.
So what, you just the government needs to get, it's not how we do things in Britain, tend to sort of stand back and let the economy decide the winners and losers.
So even if we throw money at people with a universal basic income, Hinton says that's just a band-aid on a bullet wound. Sure, folks won't starve, but what about their sense of purpose? Can't exactly pay rent in self-esteem. And let's face it, governments aren't known for stepping in unless Unless things get really messy. We're stuck between an economic revolution and a societal identity crisis. Fun times ahead.
Yes, actually I was consulted by people in Downing Street, and I advised them that universal basic income was a good idea.
And this is, I mean, you said 10 to 20% risk of them taking over.
Yes.
Are you more certain that this is going to have to be addressed in the next five years, the next parliament perhaps? Next 10
My
years?
guess is in between 5 and 20 years from now, there's a probability of about a half that we'll have to confront the problem of them trying to take over.
Wait, Hinton's been chatting with the folks running the UK, telling them to consider universal basic income. Bet that went over well, and he's throwing out a 50% chance that in 5 to 20 years, we'll be dealing with AI trying to take over. Flip a coin, heads, robots rule us. Tails, we get another decade to binge-watch Netflix. Comforting odds. Maybe time to invest in some tinfoil hats. Or, actually plan ahead.
Are you particularly impressed by the efforts of governments so far to try and rein this in?
I'm impressed by the fact that they're beginning to take it seriously. I'm unimpressed by the fact that none of them is willing to regulate military uses. And I'm unimpressed by the fact that most of the regulations have no teeth.
Do you think that the tech companies are letting down their guard on safety because they need to be the winner in this race for AI?
I don't know about the tech companies in general. I know quite a lot about Google because I used to work there. Google was very concerned about these issues, and Google didn't release the big chatbots. It was concerned about its reputation if they told lies. But as soon as OpenAI went into business with Microsoft, and Microsoft put chatbots into Bing, Google had no choice. So I think the competition is going to cause these things to be developed rapidly, and the competition means that they won't put enough effort into safety.
Parents talk to their children, give them advice on the future of the economy, what jobs they should do, what degrees that they should do. It seems like the world's being thrown up in the air by the
Yes.
world that you're describing. What would you advise somebody to study now, to kind of surf this wave?
I don't know, because it's clear that a lot of mid-level intellectual jobs are going to disappear. And if you ask which jobs are safe, my best bet about a job that's safe is plumbing, because these things aren't yet very good at physical manipulation. That'll probably be the last thing they're very good at. And so I think plumbing is safe for quite a long time.
Driving, that's
not driving, no. Driving, but that's hopeless. That's been slower than we expected. Journalism might last a little bit longer, but I think these things are going to be pretty good journalists quite soon. Probably quite good interviewers too.
Basically, Hinton's not too thrilled with how governments are handling things. Surprise. And thinks tech companies are caught in a race where safety takes a back seat to being first. And as for career advice, well, unless you fancy a wrench and a leaky pipe, you're out of luck. He says plumbing is safe because robots aren't great with physical stuff. Yet, driving and journalism, forget about it. So maybe it's time to dust off that old toolbox or start designing AI-proof jobs. So Geoffrey Hinton just painted a picture that's equal parts sci-fi and impending reality. AI might take over our jobs, our military, and maybe even our world domination plans. Meanwhile, I'm over here wondering if my toaster's plotting against me. Jokes aside, it's clear we can't sleep on this. Whether it's rethinking our careers or pushing for regulations with actual teeth, it's time to step up. After all, I'd prefer not to be outsmarted by my own coffee maker.